Do you guys have sound on? If you guys can hear me, would somebody raise a hand for a second?
Have items from the
There we
audience at the end when we have items from us.
Clint, were you needing something there?
I can hear you now. Thank you. I'm going to
Okay.
turn my video off because I have my iPad on my knees, so I'm not so jerky. And if I want to say something, I'll video on.
Sounds great.
So what I was saying before I turned on my mic, we're going to turn item 2, business from the audience. We'll have business from the audience at the end of our meeting here after our presentation of the Heights Streetscape plan. But before we move on, has everyone had a chance to review the agenda? Are there any additions or corrections? And if not, I would entertain a motion to accept as stated.
Accept.
I think I heard a second online, maybe.
Accept. Second.
Thank you, Travis. All in favor? Aye. And you have a copy of our minutes from March 16th. If you've had a chance to review those, or if everything looks agreeable to everyone, I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes as shared in our packet.
So moved.
Thank you. And a second. Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Hey,
Aye.
Justin, I'm going to turn it over to you. This is the meat and potatoes of our meeting tonight. And this is phase 3 of our Heights Streetscape plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, we have with us tonight from the project team, Nathan Plansky from MIG, who's going to present some of the findings and recommendations on phase 3 of the Heights Streetscape plan. This is a plan that was intentionally broken into 3 phases. First being goal setting, the second being some of the concept reviews and alternative selection. And now we've moved into phase 3 where we're starting to work on some more specific design refinements from that streetscape. And tonight we're going to go over some of the major ones that we're looking for your comments on before we go to the agency board. And I'll turn it over to Nathan quickly, because if I give you more of a summary, I'm going to start impacting the presentation. But we do have a presentation. It should take about, my guess is 45 minutes to an hour to go through the slides that we prepared. They help walk you through the packets that were submitted. And I believe the packet was 27 pages, not including some traffic analysis. So this is you have the written word, and now we'll have a bit of an explanation and some of the between the crack findings on what we've reviewed and some of the new materials that we've seen since we were before you last. So without any further ado, we'll turn it over to Nathan. We also have, along with Nathan, we have representatives from DKS, the traffic specialist, on board with us as well. So I think we have Kayla in the background, but yeah. We'll be here to handle any questions and take you through this.
Awesome. Thanks, Dustin. Yeah, we've been busy the last few months, so we've got a lot to cover. We'll try to cruise through it as quickly as we can. As Dustin mentioned, it's sort of a lot to get through. So I'm going to share my screen and I'll get started. All right. All right, so just kind of a quick agenda. We'll do a very brief, just kind of phase 3 scope overview, sort of where we're going to be, when we'll be seeing you guys again. It's great to be back here and kind of presenting sort of our latest work. But tonight, really going to focus on kind of four kind of key design studies that the board asked us to take a look at as a part of the authorization of the phase 3 of the project. And so those four studies are kind of design of the key intersections at 13th and May and 13th, 12th and Belmont. East-West Street design, which we haven't talked about as we were developing preliminary design concepts. So we've got some started to dig into those a little bit and how the design of those streets can support what we've been talking about for the last year plus. We've also kind of started looking into kind of refinements to the standard street cross sections that were developed with that preferred hybrid design that has been selected to kind of move forward as a preferred concept. And then one new one was sort of how does the kind of preferred concept best connect for people biking south to Pacific Avenue. So we'll give an update on these 4 items. We've got project team recommendations to talk through. We also wanted to give a sort of, based on the recommendations for each of these 4, where does the parking discussion land? And so we'll have an update on that, and then we can have an open discussion. So in terms of where we are in the project, phase 3 is about developing the preferred concept design and sort of action or implementation plan. As a part of the phase 3 contract, we added some additional check-ins with the kind of advisory committee and the board. So we're going to be meeting with you 3 times. This is the first of 3 meetings. We'll have kind of the same presentation for you that we're going to give to the board on Monday night. And so this first check-in is updates and kind of recommendations on these design studies. We'll be coming back in a few months to kind of present the final concept and begin discussing initial implementation plan, and then come back with a draft implementation plan for the 3rd check-in before a final presentation just to the board. So we've been working on a lot, and there's a lot ahead of us. So I'm going to jump right into design of key intersections. And so we're going to go through both kind of 13th and May Street and the 13th Belmont and 12th Street at the south end of the project study area. So looking at 13th and May, one of the big things that we heard coming out of phase 2 was there wasn't clear kind of consensus or alignment on what the intersection control approach would be. And there was a desire to have some additional information to help make that decision for the agency board. And so our team has gone through and sort of developed, refined the roundabout concept, and we've developed a comparable signalized intersection concept so that the agency board can really do more of an apples to apples comparison in terms of how this intersection is operating for traffic, what impacts to properties are, and what is the potential future cost to implement. So as we look at the roundabout layout, there's a few things that we've been doing. So the kind of big picture on the right is where we currently are. The smaller picture below the bullets is sort of where we started at the end of phase 2. And Dustin had contracted with, if you remember, kind of specialized roundabout consultant engineering firm who did a layout. And that layout needed some refinements for sort of the local context and adding bike facilities. And so we took a look at that layout, and we made some refinements to it, working with DKS, identifying opportunities to kind of make that footprint a little bit smaller where we could, eliminating a kind of second interior lane on the east side of the intersection. But then the big one was really adding bike facilities. And so on the picture on the right, you can see sort of the green line that is moving kind of down and kind of through that intersection and below the roundabout, sort of integrating that kind of community preferred 2-way cycle track on the south side of May Street. And then also one of the other refinements was kind of also incorporating the planned bike lanes for 13th north of May. So the TSP has a bike facility on 13th Street, and that original concept that was developed down here didn't include any of those bike facilities. And so this is sort of what that larger footprint looks like, making some refinements and adding bike facilities. To provide an apples to apples comparison, the other thing that the board was looking for is, what does a similar traffic signal layout look like? And so we had looked at traffic signal design layouts as a part of the preliminary alternatives, but what does that look like for the preferred concept and that kind of hybrid design approach with the 3-lane street on 13th? And so working with DKS, we've developed a layout for a signalized intersection at 13th and May that's shown here. And what this is allowing us to do to really take a look at, what are the property impacts for a traffic signal versus a roundabout? What are the operational impacts for moving vehicles through this intersection, and what are potential cost differences to implement? One of the other things we've done with this is start to identify, where are some of the potential retaining walls and things that will be needed to kind of implement this within the footprint that's shown. And so those are sort of called out on this graphic. So the first thing we want to talk about are operational impacts between a traffic signal and a roundabout, and what is the impact for people moving through this intersection as a car. We're going to talk about some sort of more kind of technical jargon, and so I kind of just want to reintroduce, level of service. So in the column on the left, we're looking at sort of intersection operations and the delay. And so this first column with the colored circles is level of service, and that's how well traffic flows along the street. It's expressed as a letter, from A to F, with A being kind of free flow traffic, which is great for cars, but not necessarily a great environment for people walking and biking. And at the low end of the spectrum is level of service F, which is really defined as stop and go traffic or travel times for people driving. The city's mobility standard requires level of service E. So the TSP requires intersections to meet level of service E. So this table shows in the top row sort of the TSP. So what's in the current TSP from a traffic standpoint, it would be a level of service C. It would have a delay of 31 seconds for cars moving through that intersection. And then this last column is the kind of a V over C is the volume to capacity ratio. And this is a measure of roadway congestion. So that means how many vehicles would be passing through that roadway for that future time period compared to the peak capacity that it can manage. And ODOT standards require this V to C ratio to be less than 1.0. So in the TSP scenario, you've got a level of service C that meets the city's standards. You've got a V to C that's less than 1.0. Looking at a traffic signal at this intersection, again, you've got a level of service D. You're within the city's requirements. The volume to capacity ratio is less than 1. And this is, I should clarify, is kind of without a two-way cycle track. And so this is just providing a traffic signal at that intersection. And slightly more delay compared to a TSP build. When you add in the community's preferred two-way cycle track on the south side of May, you end up having to add an extra phase to the traffic signal so that people biking can move through the intersection without concerns of being hit by vehicles that are moving through the intersection at the same time. And what that means is there's more delay for people driving through the intersection. So the level of service drops to level of service E, still within city's kind of mobility goal. The delay really increases, from a sort of 44 seconds without a cycle track to 80 seconds with a cycle track. And you can see that volume to capacity ratio now exceeds that ODOT threshold. So kind of exceeding what ODOT wants to see from an operational standpoint. Looking at a roundabout would operate with a level service C, kind of the lowest delay, sort of 18 seconds, and a volume to capacity ratio less than 1. One thing just to kind of point out about the operational analysis of a roundabout is this doesn't include any time for vehicles that are stopping for people biking. I'm going to flip back to this graphic, and if a roundabout is to move forward, we would plan to include some sort of a flashing beacon at this intersection or at this crosswalk. So as people are biking through, they can push the button, the lights can blink, and there's kind of a heightened awareness for people driving. And so when I flip back to this kind of operational summary, the roundabout doesn't take into account any additional delay that people are, when a bike is present, they're stopping for. So that's kind of level of service and the volume and capacity ratio for the different intersection designs. Vehicle queue length is another thing that we're looking at. And the vehicle queue length is the length that vehicles will stop from the intersection backing up during the analysis period. And so here we're talking about the future 2039 year for the weekday PM traffic in the summer. And so here, if you look at, a signal without the cycle track, you've got fairly long backups. Your southbound people are backing up to State Street. Northbound people are backing into A Street. When you add in that two-way cycle track, similar to way how the level of service kind of drops, you get much longer queues. And so here you have vehicles backing up beyond and onto Oak Street in the southbound direction and beyond Belmont in the northbound direction. So not ideal. I do want to kind of make sure, these are the 95th percentile queues. So this is something that might happen 5% of the time in the PM peak hour in 2039. Compare that to how a roundabout would operate, and we're looking at, very short queues for a roundabout, 100 to 200 feet. So drastic differences between kind of potential to impact vehicle traffic, particularly with some of the concerns that we've heard over the course of the project in the winter months with kind of trucks traveling up the hill southbound. In addition to the operational impacts, we also want to take a look at how do these footprints for sort of apples to apples intersections at a signal and a roundabout impact adjacent properties. And so the images on the right in blue suggest potential impacts for impacts to adjacent properties. The final impacts would be determined during final design or during engineering design, but just sort of working our way around the intersections kind of in a counterclockwise way. I'll just kind of walk through, starting in the northwest at the behavioral health building in the northwest corner. And so the roundabout, you're able to sort of shift the middle of that intersection to the east and avoid impacting that parcel and existing retaining wall and that structural sidewalk that sits along May. With the signal, you don't have as much flexibility to kind of shift the whole intersection with the roundabout. So, we do anticipate with the signal there'd be some impacts to the corner, but not impacting necessarily the building structure itself or access to the building. On the northeast corner, both intersection designs would impact that existing parking lot at the main hospital campus. I think, there's slightly more impact in area with the roundabout. It's a little bit longer, the retaining wall. Our take is that operationally people could still get into the parking lot and move through this parking lot. So while there's a reduction in parking, the operational impacts between the two are probably fairly similar. On the southeast corner is where you see a lot of impact with the roundabout. Kind of anticipate that those first 3 residential parcels on the southeast corner would be impacted by a roundabout. And so the first 2 structures are, compromised. And then the third one as well, looking at where that sort of back of sidewalk comes through and thinking about access. And in addition, the 4th lot that's just to the right of the blue, the driveway access to that parcel would need to be modified. And this kind of small portion of the parcel. So a lot of impact to adjacent property there. With the traffic signal, while the built improvements generally stay within the right of way on that corner, there's an existing driveway that exists right sort of on that northwest corner. And so access to this property really becomes compromised, and is anticipated that is a lot that would have to be acquired by the city potentially. And then kind of the last corner at the southwest corner of the intersection, Jackson Park. And so here you can see a roundabout impacts more of the park from an area standpoint, although the impact along May Street for the channelization on May with the signal may have more impact to the parking area. So definitely more property impact with the roundabout. So kind of working through those, I think, it became fairly clear to the project team that, the traffic impacts associated with the traffic signal and those vehicle queue lengths backing up in the PM peak hour in the future down to Oak Street really wasn't tenable for the project. And so, while there are more property impacts, the cost to implement a roundabout, could be, 50, 130 to 140% more than the cost of a signal. And then there's on top of that cost for right-of-way acquisition. I think that the overriding traffic impacts really mean that, the recommendation here from the project team is for a roundabout. Two other things I wanted to point out is, the green cycle track here on the south side of the intersection, it does require a much longer path of travel moving through that intersection. And so there is that to consider. The other thing is, to the southeast of the intersection, as the city acquires these properties, there could be an opportunity for placemaking adjacent to the intersection in the future. So that's kind of the update for 13th and May. I'm gonna keep going and we'll kind of talk through 13th, Belmont, and 12th, and sort of a similar series of slides that talk through this intersection. You might recall when we last looked at a double roundabout at this intersection, there were a couple of different layouts that had been developed during phase 2. The layout on the left was one that had been developed by the project team and presented at the open house last April, so about a year ago. Dustin had also contracted with the roundabout specialist to say, what is another configuration of a double roundabout that tries to preserve or reduce property impacts on kind of the southwest side. And this was a different iteration that had been developed. Ultimately, there are more iterations depending the different constraints that you plug into this. And so what we wanted to look at is, if you took one of these and you moved it forward knowing what the preferred concept was, what might a footprint look like? And so as a part of this exercise, we took the double roundabout that had been developed for the open house in 2022, and we looked at how bike facilities that are planned for the heights could be integrated. So that means, how do you take a two-way cycle track from 12th Street and continue it to the south? Here it's shown as a shared use path continuing along the east side. There's also planned bike lanes on Belmont to the west of the double roundabout, and thinking about how do people biking east and west on Belmont access 12th. And sort of similar, it's kind of getting them outside of the roadway and having a shared path with people walking and biking to make those movements east and west. So that shows, a slightly larger footprint than that had been shown before. There is sort of a placemaking opportunity, albeit somewhat small, in the eastern half of Belmont. One of the other things that a double roundabout does is having two lanes entering the roundabout and having that kind of entry angle is you do impact parking along the west side of 13th. So kind of right in front of, I think it's 10 Speed Coffee and kind of the businesses right there north of Belmont. So that's sort of the, refinements or updates to a double roundabout. We also then wanted to look at what would a traffic signal look like.
Placemaking opportunity means? Sorry.
Yeah, they go. So this is basically a space that is, outside of the footprint of the intersection. It could be a place where you could create a small plaza, a community gathering space. It could be planting, something that aligns with sort of community needs and goals. And so really thinking about the same way that I think we've talked in the past a little bit about, these large green areas. inside the double roundabout sort of become an opportunity for planting. And so as someone's entering, you kind of have an opportunity to sort of create a sense of place that's different than there is today. Does that help?
Yes.
So we also we're looking at a traffic signal, and given the impacts to properties and access to properties associated with the double roundabout, what are the different ways that you could develop a signalized intersection to provide a more comparable alternative for evaluation, and that manages congestion, manages those queue lengths, minimizes kind of impacts to parking or kind of the kind of roadway widening, and then kind of maintains access for people walking and biking, to really allow the project team and ultimately kind of evaluate kind of operational, property, and cost impacts between a roundabout and a signal. And so working with DKS, we explored 4 different intersection configurations to manage these multiple intersections. So going from left to right, and these were sort of the range of brainstorming options that could work with, that we felt worked at some level with the preferred hybrid design. And so option 1 was, what if you made Belmont eastbound traffic only? Option 2 is, well, what if you took Belmont out of the picture between 12th and 13th and provided a connection kind of to the south? And this is actually similar to something that had been discussed with ODOT staff last year as we were talking about preliminary design alternatives. Option 3 was adding a lane of traffic to 13th to kind of help move vehicles through this intersection given the volume of traffic. And then option 4 was making traffic on Belmont westbound only. So those were the range of options that the team thought could be potential or had some potential. We then went through and did a traffic analysis to kind of identify, how did each of these options operate for cars. So the top table, again, is that level of service and that volume to capacity ratio that I mentioned. In this scenario, all of them, operated better than the kind of city standard E. They met ODOT standard. There is a range. Option 2 had the least delay at 17 seconds. Option 4 had up to 39 seconds. So there is some range in the delay for vehicles moving through there. Looking at queue lengths, option 3 that added an extra lane of southbound traffic to the north side of this intersection at 13th and Belmont had the shortest queue lengths, and so you only are backing up a little bit, but you're taking away parking from that west side of the street, which, kind of stepping back and looking at the kind of broader community goals, didn't feel like that, even though it kind of had the shortest queues, made sense. And so looking at the level of service, the volume to capacity, and these queue lengths, we felt that option 2 that closed Belmont provided the best kind of balance as an alternative to a double roundabout. And so the graphic that's shown here on the right shows what that configuration might look like. And here, again, you're closing Belmont Avenue. And again, you see this kind of bigger opportunity for placemaking or a shared street. And, is this a place where it's a farmer's market or festival street type application? There's a lot of opportunity that could happen there if it's not being used to move cars. So comparing then kind of operational impacts between the double roundabout that we talked about initially and then this option 2 for a traffic signal that closes Belmont, we can kind of go through these same technical tables and we kind of say, okay, option 2 for closing Belmont for a traffic signal has a level of service of B, 17 seconds delay, and a volume capacity ratio that's within the ODOT's requirement. And looking at the roundabouts, there's 2 lanes through the roundabout. And unfortunately, one of the challenges with the roundabout is you sort of kind of go to this all to nothing type situation. So you've got very good level of service for cars, very low delay. And then looking at the table on the right at the queue lengths, again, you can kind of see, we just talked about, in the southbound direction for the traffic signal, you're looking at potentially 1,100 feet of queue length. And so to put that in perspective, Taylor is 1,000 feet away. So you're backing up, to Taylor and kind of 5% of the time and 2039 in the summer weekdays, PM period, but you're not backing up to May Street and impacting the operations of that next intersection. And similarly for northbound traffic, there's a, up to a 450-foot backup, which doesn't extend as far as Nick's Drive. Whereas a roundabout has relatively short queue lengths, kind of 100, 200 feet in either direction. That's the operational side of it. We've also got potential property impacts, and this is one that we knew coming in, and kind of the why we were looking at the traffic signal is that you've got that double roundabout that impacts a lot of properties and businesses at these sets of intersections. You've got potentially up to 5 full parcels being impacted. 3 of those with this layout have existing businesses today, and there's also impacts to kind of parts of 2 other parcels. Whereas the traffic signal really just impacts that kind of parcel that's in the middle, and kind of access becomes challenging. So there's sort of kind of one parcel that's impacted. So very big differences between property impacts. Again, these are, they don't reflect exact locations, and kind of final property impacts would be identified as a part of a future intersection design. So kind of taking into account the kind of operational considerations, property impacts, and then also looking at a kind of cost estimate, project team recommends a traffic signal for this intersection, kind of given the impacts to properties and businesses with the double roundabout. There are long backups, particularly for southbound traffic, but I think there was sort of that was sort of a bit of a known thing, knowing that kind of narrowing down to kind of, 1 lane of street in the southbound direction is going to kind of lead to more traffic. It also provides more direct access for people walking and biking through the intersection. So you can see how, at the signalized intersection, you can have crosswalks that connect directly to this kind of, placemaking shared street opportunity, then can connect over to 12th. We also, based on planning level cost estimate, anticipate that a double roundabout would cost, potentially up to 2 times the cost of a traffic signal, without even accounting for the cost for right-of-way acquisition. So that is the project team recommendation for this set of intersections. Just to kind of step back, we've kind of dived into the details of each individual intersection, but jumping out and looking at the big picture, a roundabout at May and 13th and a traffic signal at Belmont on 13th, from an operational standpoint, the traffic modeling indicates, these intersections would operate independently. We don't anticipate backups to impact the other intersection. And on May Street, we don't anticipate that westbound vehicles moving towards the roundabout would back up into the signal that's at 12th Street. So sort of at a neighborhood scale, these pair well together in terms of keeping traffic moving. So that's key intersections. I know that was a lot. We've got a lot to get through, so I'm going to kind of keep plugging through here. So the second element that we've been looking at is the design of east-west streets, and really thinking about how we can sort of maximize and offset some of the parking loss potentially on 12th and 13th streets with the hybrid design approach, while also providing enhanced access for people walking and biking, particularly along Taylor Avenue and A Street. So sort of 3 scenarios to consider here. 1, keeping that existing configuration. and then two scenarios that we're going to walk through now. Sort of one is a combination of 1- and 2-way streets, and another is just sort of looking at alternating 1-way streets. So talking about east-west streets, we're really just talking about A, B, C, and Taylor. So those 4 streets between Belmont and May. So this is the combination that looks at a 1- and 2-way streets. The idea here is that you would have 1-way streets on A Street with eastbound vehicles and westbound vehicles on Taylor. And the idea here is reducing it to 1-way to allow a space to bike for people in both directions. And the way to do that would be by introducing what's called a contraflow bike lane. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but you would have people biking with traffic, with cars in one direction, and this contraflow bike lane in the other. B and C streets would be 2-way traffic with parallel parking on both sides of the street. So fairly similar to the configuration that's out there today on those streets, except that there would be parking on both sides of the street as opposed to only one. And this does result in potentially up to 12 additional parking stalls on these east-west streets combined. So a contraflow bike lane, I know that's a new term. It's not one we've talked about before. I'm not aware of any contraflow bike lanes in Hood River, but a contraflow bike lane, as shown in the picture here, is a bike lane that's kind of going against 1-way traffic on a 1-way street. So here you can see there's got this blue vehicle moving towards us. There's parallel parking on both sides of the street, and there's a bike lane going in the opposite direction. And what this allows is improved connections in neighborhoods and kind of more direct access for people biking in both directions. These work best on low speed, low volume streets. So as we're looking at, these one blocks between 12th and 13th that don't necessarily have great vehicle connectivity east-west. They're good opportunities to provide some space for people biking. Contraflow bike lanes are typically used where you've got a lot of people that are already riding in the wrong way from traffic, or where you're trying to kind of provide that direct access to destination, east or west in our case. One of the things that does need to be considered is sort of the final design of these, particularly when you're siting the contraflow bike lane next to parking. So when we look at these 4 east-west streets, combination of 1- and 2-way streets, here are some typical cross sections of them. And so on the left column, we've got Taylor Avenue. And so here I mentioned you've got westbound traffic. And so you've got one vehicle lane moving westbound. People would bike in the same direction as that traffic. And you've got the contraflow bike lane next to it. You've got angle parking on one side of the street to try to squeeze in a little bit more parking than you would with parallel parking. And then you also have parallel parking on the other side. They're kind of squeezing in angle parking. You really only get one additional parking stall along this block. The image below it is from a real world example in the city of Tacoma. And so this shows a 1-way street with parking on both sides and a contraflow bike lane. The one difference here is you've got angle parking on both sides. In the middle are B and C streets. So these are the 2-way streets. These would function very similar to the way that they do today in the Heights, except there'd be parking on both sides of the street and on both streets. And the image below shows an example of a street in Seattle, Washington, that kind of has a 34-foot curb to curb width. So you can kind of get a sense for how much space is there with parking on both sides. And then on the right side of the screen is kind of A Street, which would be eastbound traffic only. The contraflow bike lane and then parallel parking on both sides of the street. And so, here you get between these 4 streets, you end up with about 12 additional parking stalls compared to the existing condition combined across these blocks. So these are narrow, these do with kind of parking on both sides. It does create narrower streets along all 4 of these. we have met with emergency services and fire marshal, and they are okay with the narrow streets. They recognize it's not ideal, but with the constraints that we're working with and everything that we're trying to fit within the public right of way, they were okay with the narrow roadways. I think the one thing the project team felt is that the one way at the ends, two way in the middle, are probably less predictable for people driving than having either all one way or all two way streets. And so speaking of the all one way streets, again, so here's alternating one way streets. So kind of going from south to north, you've got eastbound traffic on A Street, westbound on B, eastbound on C, and westbound on Taylor. And we're kind of thinking about, as you move north on 12th Street, these intersections start to offset. So we've kind of been thinking about what's the best orientation for the east-west traffic. So we feel, compared to the kind of one and two way street combination, these are probably more predictable for people driving. They still utilize contraflow bike lanes to provide access for people biking in the east and west direction. And instead of plus 12 parking stalls, maybe plus 15 parking stalls from the existing condition. And that additional parking really comes from squeezing in some more angle parking, which is shown here in the blue line. So from a cross-section standpoint, Taylor Avenue on the left, this is the exact same set of graphics that we had shown previously for that kind of one-way condition. Same thing for A Street. And the difference here is that B and C streets in the middle are now one-way traffic. So here you can see, rather than having two lanes of traffic, we drop one lane of traffic and we take that extra space and we provide angle parking. The image below is it's actually a parking lot that's adjacent to a roadway. It's hard to find a great example here. So this one is actually a few feet wider than what this cross section might look like. So you can see it is a very tight condition to kind of get that angle parking with a kind of narrow travel lane and then the parallel parking on the other side of the street. Kind of going back to the overview, we feel that kind of alternating one-way streets can be designed to be more predictable for people driving. And again, these narrow or even narrower streets, we have met with the fire marshal, and they are okay with that if that were the decision that were to be made. So based on that analysis and kind of review, kind of the project team's recommendation is, we feel one-way streets provide more predictability for people driving. We think the opportunity to include those contraflow bike lanes to provide bike access in both east and directions improves connectivity through the neighborhood and to kind of the schools east and west. As I mentioned, fire and emergency services are okay with one-way streets and the lane widths. I think then the last bullet here is, rather than providing angle parking, which provides just a small increase in parking, we think parallel parking would be better on both sides of the street for the one-way streets. We feel it would provide more flexibility for a larger range of vehicles. And so when you're thinking about, sprinter vans, pickups, larger vehicles that are coming through, rather than, this kind of tight angle parking spot, and knowing that Wall Street also has angle parking, we thought that parallel parking on two sides of the street may be better and allow for sort of more flexibility looking forward. It would allow potentially a slightly wider travel lane, and it could also allow for wider sidewalks. So kind of a slightly better sidewalk environment for people walking. So that's the project team's recommendation for the east-west street design. Moving on to kind of the third study is really looking at the cross sections for 12th and 13th. these are two very different contexts. We've got one lane of street with angle parking on 12th. We've got a 3-lane cross section on 13th. Both of them have different needs and characteristics. And so we've been kind of spending some time diving deeper into refinements to these. For 12th Street, the cross section, we've got 60 feet of right of way to work with. And what we really want to think about, what makes the most sense for parking access, kind of getting people comfortably in and out of that angle parking stall. What's the width of the adjacent travel lane, the width of the parking stall. Really thinking critically about the width of the cycle track, given the multiple needs we're trying to fit within the 60 feet, and what does that edge condition look like along the vehicle side, along the sidewalk side, and what are the implications to kind of construct and maintain that. So this is the original cross section from the preliminary design alternatives, and what we've been looking at is from a parking standpoint, thinking about kind of local needs, local context, kind of the range of vehicle sizes, the desired turnover. How can we make it, slightly more, call it accessible for people getting into and out of parking? That original cross section was based on this kind of downtown Main Street, which is on a project on Bainbridge Island I worked on a long time ago, and that kind of 12-foot lane and 16-foot dimension works great in that context. I think with a one-way street and having an edge over here, we wonder if having a little bit more space for the type of vehicles that are moving through the heights might make sense. And so we also went back and looked at, the city has design standards for parking lots. Within that guide, they have a 17.5-foot parking width and a 12-foot lane, so a little bit more than we had. And then another resource that we've used in the past is 17.5-foot parking with an 11-foot lane. So thinking about upsizing that parking stall a little bit to accommodate a wider variety of vehicle sizes and kind of ease access in and out. This picture on the bottom right is a similar condition. Here's a 42-foot street, so it's slightly wider, 2 feet wider, but you can kind of see the space with angle parking, travel lane, and a two-way bike lane. You will note that this is actually back and angle parking, which isn't something that we've been talking about. So that's some things we've been thinking about from a parking standpoint. We're also looking at the kind of width and the demand for the two-way cycle track. Thinking about, what is the anticipated number of people that are going to be biking along 12th, and how do we best size that to fit the needs of drivers, people walking, and people biking? And so this table on the top right is actually from the Netherlands kind of bike design manual, and they have some sort of guidance related to rush hour intensities, or kind of the number of people biking per hour, and kind of sizing that for that width based on those number of users. And so when you're thinking about the number of people that might be biking in Hood River and thinking about the extra, the kind of impact to people walking and driving, is there an opportunity to right size that facility a little bit? Additionally, looking at kind of NACTO as sort of the kind of local domestic best practice design guide, looking at sort of, they allow up to 8 feet in constrained conditions. And then thinking about what is that separation adjacent to a travel lane or parking. And so really diving into these dimensions a little bit to kind of refine how to best balance the right of way. In addition to the width, it's, what's the correct level of protection and separation from the roadwalk and the sidewalk. One of the things that becomes really challenging as you're designing a cycle track next to a sidewalk is how do you kind of limit the conflicts between people walking and biking at intersections and the crosswalks. And so we feel that, having the cycle track at street grade helps to eliminate that. So whereas the original concept or the preliminary concept showed cycle track at sidewalk grade, this really presents some challenges at the intersections. And so instead we're focusing on keeping that cycle track at street grade and thinking more about how can we provide some level of protection that's both comfortable and safe for people biking. So this is something that we haven't landed on as kind of specific recommendation, but something that we're going to continue to explore. And so here's a kind of quick summary. At the top is the original cross section from the preliminary design alternatives. These first two rows going across show some of the parking dimensions I just mentioned. The following rows get at some of the cycle track widths. And so kind of going through this exercise, we feel kind of recommend increasing the parking stall sizing by a foot, reducing the cycle track width by 2 feet, and then dropping the cycle track down to street grade and maintaining a 10-foot sidewalk. Kind of provides sort of, I don't know, call it the best balance within the limited space that's available. So that's 12th Street, some of the cross-section refinements we've been looking at 13th, along 13th, sort of different challenges and considerations. One of those is really kind of a result of the existing kind of built environment and the adjacent buildings, particularly on the west side of the street. 13th is actually a 50-foot right-of-way, and so beyond that 50 feet, there are 5-foot sidewalk easements in place that aren't fully built out everywhere. And so there are building ramps and structures that come right up to kind of the 50-foot right-of-way in places. The other thing that we want to look at is how can we kind of mitigate or improve the street environment now that we have 3 travel lanes moving traffic north and south. So how can we keep traffic, slow traffic down now that it's a wider street? And then what do the kind of sidewalk environments look like on either side of the street? So looking at the east side of the street, there's no parking on this side of the street. So you've got a travel lane that's directly adjacent to the sidewalk, and not a very good environment for people walking. So how can you, narrow that sidewalk to provide a buffer from the travel lane? And so I think what we would propose and recommend is narrowing that sidewalk to provide a 6-foot clear sidewalk, which leaves sort of a 3.5-foot space for sort of an opportunity for plantings, potentially some kind of columnar street trees. This condition or similar condition actually exists right in the Heights, down along on the north side of May Street, fronting the hospital. And so here you can see, you can get some smaller shrubs and you can get kind of mulch and maybe even some kind of columnar trees directly adjacent to the travel lane. And so that's sort of what that kind of street section might look like with a narrower sidewalk, and kind of provide some separation from the sidewalk or from the roadway for people walking. On the west side, in response to sort of that 50-foot right-of-way and some of the existing constraints that are in the out there today, this apartment building that's on the corner of 13th and A, you can see that the building is set back 10 feet from the curb, but you have a ramp and stairs that are within that 5 feet. And this is probably the most fixed object, but there are multiple locations along 13th Street where that west sidewalk really becomes a lot narrower potentially. And so as we think about kind of as properties redevelop, making sure that those sidewalk easements are in place to provide the 10-foot sidewalk. Talking about a street cross section with 3 travel lanes and thinking about how can we slow vehicles down and provide traffic calming along 13th. There's a variety of strategies that we're looking at, and as we move forward beyond today, will be kind of some additions and refinements to these, but kind of the key tools are looking at medians. So how at Taylor and at A Street can we incorporate medians similar to this first picture to help provide a kind of more protected pedestrian crossing and an opportunity to incorporate kind of some flashing beacons or rectangular rapid flashing beacons that raise the awareness for this crosswalk. We're also looking at, with parking on the west side of 13th, integrating curb extensions along that side of the street to slow cars down as they approach and kind of move through the intersections. And then working with Columbia Area Transit CAT, there are no stops on 13th, 12th and 13th today. There is a desire in the future to potentially have them. And, what are the opportunities to incorporate bus stops? And so here, the location that had been identified as a potential opportunity is, down at A Street. And this actually coincides with that last picture where you've got that sort of ramp sticking out in that 5 feet. And so here you have a potential to sort of site a bus stop, have a curb extensions, and sort of improve that narrow condition there. And so here, as it's shown in the picture, you'd have potentially, a bus stopping in the travel lane to pick people up and drop people off. Something that, could be accommodated in the future if CAT decides to add bus stops. So the kind of refinements to the typical street cross sections, our recommendation is to kind of continue to work through these and kind of build on kind of the recommendations that I've just talked through. One of the other things in talking with Dustin is having the city explore opportunities to obtain easements or right-of-way to expand the sidewalk zone from 10 feet to 12 feet. So that would mean, as properties redevelop, let them know that the recommendation is to have a 2-foot setback for their building so you can have a little bit more space in the sidewalk area, both on 12th Street and on 13th. On 12th Street, we are still working to identify that kind of appropriate separation of materials between the cycle track and the vehicle lane. Really thinking about safety, comfort, and then flexibility in terms of maintenance access for plowing and emergency vehicles. And then along 13th, once there's confirmation and direction on key intersections in the east-west street design, we can continue to kind of build on the traffic calming strategies that I just talked through. All right, so the last kind of design study we've been working through is the bike connection to Pacific Avenue. This was really intended just to be a quick look at, what might a cross section look like to accommodate a bike facility south of our project study area. So here's just a picture looking south the existing street. What that looks like in a cross section, the existing ODOT right away here has kind of wider 14-foot lanes on adjacent to the sidewalks, and then 12-foot lanes in between. And so there's 2 scenarios that we've outlined. Both of these, rather than a kind of dedicated cycle track, provide a shared use path. So providing a shared space for walking and biking allows us to keep the footprint a little bit smaller than we would if we provided dedicated spaces for people biking and people walking. So here, what we'd be doing in red dashed line, you can kind of see the existing curb footprint. So here we'd be narrowing the lanes slightly to provide some space that would allow us to provide sort of a planting strip, potentially have street trees there, and then also expand that existing sidewalk to the east into that sloped area. So it'd be a new retaining wall and fence, relocate the utility poles, but provide a 12-foot shared use path along that east side of the street. There is a sort of a limitation as you get to the south, right near Pacific Avenue, at the gas station of the Dutch Brothers parcel that would need to be studied as a sort of future project. But this could connect directly to the cycle track on 12th Street to the north. The alternative to working within the right-of-way footprint is sort of telling people that are biking they have to drop down to Indian Creek Trail. So widening that existing trail, you're basically routing people probably 30 vertical feet down to the creek and then back up. You still have some challenges, at that kind of gas station, Dutch Brothers parcel. But we didn't think kind of making people go outside of the roadway and down to the creek made sense. And so the sort of, from a quick cross-section study, felt that a shared use path along the roadway provided the most direct access for people biking and is something that could be explored further with ODOT. So that's the kind of recap of the 4 design studies. I also wanted to quickly walk through where we are at impacts to on-street parking based on the current recommendations that we've just walked through and kind of intersection improvements. And so if you recall, in 2021, the first parking study was conducted for the Heights. From that parking study, we kind of learned that there's adequate capacity today in the Heights. Observed parking capacity was only about 50%. As a part of that study, DKS also sort of forecasted future parking demand that included 100% of buildings being occupied, future growth, and the ability to use 85% of parking. So there was sort of that future demand that was forecasted. Also a recognition that changing the street design in the Heights could shift people away from cars, and a slight reduction in vehicle trips that could mean less parking demand. And then parking isn't currently managed, and so that's another thing that could potentially be done to manage parking. So here's a table of sort of summarizing current in the top row, current existing conditions. There's 156 on-street stalls on 12th and 13th. There are 148 on-street stalls on the east-west streets. And then there are 410 off-street parking spaces that are private parking spaces on private property, but available for public use. So kind of a total district parking count today of 714. The TSP, reduces that by taking away parking on 12th and 13th for planned bike lanes. The hybrid concept and the kind of design studies that we've just talked through result in less parking loss than the TSP. So more parking on 12th and 13th. The strategies that we just looked on the east-west streets add some parking for the preferred concept. There is a slight reduction in off-street parking associated with the loss of parking down at that triangular parcel at the 12th, 13th, and Belmont intersection. And so, comparing kind of current proposed with project team recommendations, parking availability, 634 parking stalls to that estimated 2040 summertime parking demand, 657, within 5%. And I think from that parking study, there's an opportunity that there may be some mode shift and less people driving and more people walking and parking that could help offset that a little bit. So in the ballpark for the long-term kind of projection. So that was a lot of information to cover. I appreciate your patience with me getting through it, and I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and come back and join you guys. I saw Dustin's seat was empty. Hopefully he hasn't left us.
No, I'm here.
All right.
I'm just catching up my notes, and I have a lot of questions and comments, Nathan, but if I take the pole position by saying thank you, I'm happy to do it. That was really impressive. I've already read through this all, and I've checked in with Dustin about it over the phone while I was on my way to Bend, where I am. I'm just super impressed. It's so easy to read. It's so well reasoned, and your decisions are very well supported, and I just super appreciate it. If I can keep going, if no one minds, I think the placemaking idea is great. I love that. I'm in Bend right now, and I have been for a week and a half, and I'll be here for another while. It's all over Bend. The roundabouts and the placemaking is really cool. It really makes a special way to get through town. The contraflow bike lanes, I'm just going to give you this as I wrote my notes down. The only concern I have about those is, do they encourage inconsistent behavior for cyclists, especially kids, since we're mostly talking about school cyclists. And Jack, I know you're a cyclist too, and I think we probably share the dismay when we see cyclists breaking the rules and aggravating cars, because we feel like we bear the brunt of it later. So I'll just put that in people's heads. One thought is there a way to anticipate alternative traffic habits? And I'm thinking about myself when I came up with this question, like when the traffic light limits the southbound traffic on the new light at Belmont, would traffic increase on Taylor for people heading south and west to go home, like me, and the people out on Avalon and stuff? That might help, change the numbers a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys have thought of.
Yeah, we talked a lot about that and sort of how our people are going to hit that and they're going to get backed up once or twice that live there.
Then
And
go
they're
a
gonna go, oh, that's right. It's 5:30 on Thursday, and I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to turn off on May, right?
Or kick off on May or Taylor or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's, I think, and Kayla could kind of chime in if I'm wrong here, but I think we made some sort of adjustments and kind of assumed some people would turn off, but you could kind of continue to iterate on that. And
Yeah.
it's going to play out when it does. And these are also the 95th percentile queue length. So it's 5% of the time and the 20:39 p.m. peak. So.
Yeah. Sorry, I got a phone call. That was what I anticipated. On the existing or the east-west street connectors, changing them to one way, I completely agree that having them alternate makes people sort of anticipate what happened with the changes. I'm questioning whether bike travel should be encouraged on any of those intermediate streets, because it's so improved at the ends. So when you're traveling by bike and commuting by bike, especially, you find the least resistance, most safe path, the one that you like, and you stick with that. And maybe all those intermediate streets can just be free of bikes or be discouraged rather, so that it improves traffic through where it really is meant to go. I don't need to comment about that. While I'm on the bike thought though, one thing about improved bike traffic, and I see this everywhere I go, where I ride, is that it decreases car traffic and the need for parking, because it's much more pleasurable to go somewhere on bike if you're into that than to drive and have to worry about parking and meters and yet. And so it's a win-win there. And then as far as parking goes, the count is always in flux, right? And so the CCCU just bought the Community Credit Union on, it's between 12th and 13th and B and C, I believe. They just bought 2 houses, demolished them, and they're putting in their own parking next to Anderson Floors. And I don't think they're going to knock that building down too, but that's another 30 stalls. So that's kind of cool. So those are my thoughts. I'm sorry for hogging, but I also really feel like the improvements made downtown with this urban growth district are so big and people appreciate them so much that it's improved the pedestrian use, it's improved the bike use, and that's going to happen in the Heights, maybe even more so when we make these changes. And so I think it's good to talk about worst case scenarios of parking and traffic congestion, but I think it's going to improve because people will spend less time driving and more time riding and walking. So, and again, thank you so much, because the presentation was fabulous. And now I will shut up.
Nathan, I have a couple of things. Yeah, I appreciate the presentation. I think you took away a lot of what we talked about at our last meetings, especially I appreciated the one-way streets, from A, B, C, and Taylor. I think that's a benefit. One thing I see that your recommendation is to close the Belmont Union Street. When I visioned this, I always kind of imagined keeping that open and keeping traffic starting there going eastbound and then just alternating down. And Clint, you can chime back in. This would make Taylor a one-way eastbound, which I feel would mitigate people cutting out of Pine Street, cutting across traffic and turning left immediately on Taylor. If we kept the Belmont Union open, kept it eastbound, A Street westbound, B Street East, C West, Taylor East. I'm not familiar with the contra bike traffic, but I like what Clint said about if we do a good job of directing traffic to May Street and Belmont, maybe we don't have to dedicate bike lanes through these side streets. But I don't know with the kids and the youth and the contra traffic, that kind of goes against everything I taught my kids when they ride their bikes. I do like the traffic signal on Belmont. I think that's the only feasible and practical approach. The double roundabout was kind of high in the sky. And I know your recommendation on May Street was the roundabout. And there's 3 lots that are affected by that property acquisition. I definitely want to channel my inner Pat McAllister and voice that a traffic signal there would not work, which you said as well. So I don't have to voice it very, very loud. Those are just some of my takeaways from the presentation. I guess the big one would just be maybe talking about closing Belmont and Union and how everyone else feels about that, because that was something that I never envisioned for the Heights.
I'm going to kick back in. Thanks, Jack. That was something I meant to write down and I didn't, about Belmont closing. I love their rationale for closing it, and I think it's a really good solution. And I've thought about this quite a bit since I kind of got my brain wrapped around it, the way they have it drawn, and the way what that does for traffic if you're coming down Belmont trying to get on the 12th. I think it makes that it eliminates the dangerous westbound traffic to get over to the main Belmont from 12th to 13th. That intersection is so bad. So that said, I want to try to share this. I'm not sure this is going to work. This is my phone, and this is a short video. It's like 20 seconds, I think, but this is a traffic lane. Sorry, hold it in the right area in Steamboat, I believe, or maybe Breckenridge. I rode the Great Divide last summer, and this is a section of road where we had been on fabulous bike trails to get through town. Okay, this is about a 45-mile-an-hour road along a reservoir. I think it's Breckenridge, and it's just paint. And the reason is they have to be able to push tons of snow that comes off that hillside to his right over that guardrail and down into the reservoir. So anything sticking up there is in the way of traffic and bikes and cars. But that paint made us feel so safe for about 1.5 miles, I think it was. And like, that might be an opportunity. It's as simple as that. It doesn't have to be bollards or something that flips down or something you could break a foot on. But I thought that was brilliant on our ride, because it would have been a really scary road otherwise. And we felt confident that the cars were giving us lots and lots of room, even though we were going the wrong way against the traffic. Okay, I'll shut up again. Sorry, I'm bouncing all over.
You didn't put on that Belmont closure at all, or let me know when.
Yeah, let's go ahead and we'll have anybody here can share. But yeah, I would definitely love to hear from you, Dave, in a moment.
Whenever.
I think that's significantly affects.
Maybe the most person affected in this room by that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I definitely acknowledge, like, they're just gonna be affected. And yeah, I don't know, I didn't expect like that as an option, but when I saw it, I really like it. Because I think that it really simplifies the intersection for me. I mean, I know, like, if you're coming from Belmont and you want to go like left on 12, essentially, it makes it a little bit more complicated, but there's multiple options for that. Now you can go left at the light or right and then left. And then I really like the placemaking, because we've talked about placemaking, but we don't have a lot of space in the Heights unless we do close a road like that. Like, there's just not, I don't see a lot of potential space for just like a place for, placemaking benches and tables and like just neighborhood atmosphere, so, I don't know, like having that option personally. And I think it would affect your, obviously you would like lose access to your parking and like, but there is a parking lot next door, like.
But you can't get to that party. I didn't find.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know,
You can shut me down.
well, no, people love you, Dave, we're coming to your office.
Walk.
We will find you.
Once you can walk.
But, yeah, I mean, it's like not fair, but I think, you know, like, people are, it's gonna affect us all in some ways. It's just obviously not maybe the same. Anyway, that's my idea.
Nathan, I had a couple of questions. Well, first of all, a nice report. I appreciate it. A lot of technical, tough information that you presented in an easily understandable manner. So I appreciate the report. On the roundabout on 13th, that's projected, the model projected at 2039 weekday peak summer. What happens, when does it hit that LOS level?
The backups, the kind of those, you said, so level of service is sort of the overall intersection operation. Is there can you say that one again? Sorry. What specifically about when it hits that, or is there a point between now and 2039 if it roundabout is implemented that it starts to get really bad or worse?
I guess the opposite question is, if you put in a signal, when would it trigger that stacking, which is unacceptable, obviously.
Okay, the down to Oaktree, gotcha.
Does it happen only in 2039? Does it happen as early as 2030?
I'm gonna look to my right on my screen and look at Kayla and see if she can kind of, I know I'll let her try to explain sort of the ability that we have to look incrementally forward and sort of what assumptions we can make about that.
Yeah, so the signal at 13th of May, that was the one you were asking about, correct? That one starts to fail with the cycle track. Right, that was the one where we were showing it with the VC over 1 with the LOSE, the high delay. It was because we were implementing the cycle track with that signal. And I would expect that signal pretty shortly after operating to be pretty shortly after opening to be operating pretty poorly with that cycle track. Again, because you have to give people biking pretty much their own exclusive phase at the signal. You can't have any vehicle movements going at the same time as that cycle track, given the way that the lanes are configured. It wouldn't take long after opening for that to start to look pretty bad, having those really long queues, that risk of spilling back to Oak Street.
Okay. I guess I'm persuaded as well that a signal won't work there. I would like to suggest that there be activated flashing beacons for all the crosswalks, not just the one in the south. I think it's a pretty busy intersection for pedestrians. So I would encourage you to do that. At 13th and Belmont and 12th, I like your idea, your recommendation. I'm sure we'll hear from the property owner and he can speak to the city council about that as well. But I support it. I think it's a good idea. I like the placemaking or the opportunity for them. On the east-west streets, I agree with the staff recommendation. I'm not a big fan of the contraflow either, and I wonder if you could get rid of those contraflows. Could you make the sidewalks a little bit wider and perhaps add landscaping? I didn't see a lot of landscaping on the east-west streets.
No, there's not. You know, A, B, and C are only 50-foot right of way, so you even have 10 feet less than we're looking at in their other streets, and so you're really narrow sidewalks.
And also, if you get rid of the angled parking, and which I support, perhaps you could also widen the sidewalks and put in some landscaping with that. On the cross sections on 12th Street, I think London or somebody had a 2-foot wide median, and I'm wondering if we could get away with that and add an extra foot to the dual bike path. that bike path could be pretty popular. 8 feet seems narrow to me. And in terms of what to use in that separation, I would explore some kind of natural treatment, vegetation, grass that the snowplows can go over in the winter, and then it grows in the summer. Something that the pictures that you showed seem kind of industrial to me. And we're trying to have a placemaking spot, a pedestrian friendly ambiance there. So I would encourage you to find something a little nicer, perhaps. I'm wondering on 12th Street, is there any opportunity for curb extensions, particularly on the, I guess it'd be the west side where you don't have the bike path? Curb extensions really seem to help the pedestrians get across the streets.
Yeah, there are great opportunities for curb extensions at the end of the blocks where you can't park, and also kind of through driveways where you're not going to have parking. So there are great opportunities there, and that's sort of the next step is as we develop that preferred concept to start to look at the kind of opportunities and what does a typical space sort of look like and feel like for people on the street.
And then I agree with your recommendations on 13th Street, widening the sidewalk, and also the bike path to Pacific. I agree with your recommendation, keeping the dual use up along the road. But is there an opportunity for access to Indian Creek as well? Not necessarily for the north-south access, but just to provide access to Indian Creek Trail. I'm kind of hoping you can do both. In terms of parking, I'm fine with your proposal. I agree it's within 5%, and with automated vehicles and Uber, etc. I think parking is going to not be as needed as we currently have. So generally speaking, I agree with all your recommendations with the comments. And thanks again for your report.
I'm back.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. That was a great presentation. And I think all the things that I feel have already been expressed by other people, I do also understand and agree with all the recommendations that were indicated in this report and the packet that we got. Regarding contra bike lanes, I was a bicycle commuter in Chicago and New York City for a long time, and I have used them, and I know that they seem weird at first. But I think that having, honestly, I can't say that I prefer them to, what you've mentioned, just not having them, with the exception of having a dedicated bike lane, I think is important for protecting cyclists, regardless of what direction that they're in. And the issue of closing Belmont, I don't know how I feel about that. Personally, I understand why that makes sense. I don't know that I have anything meaningful to contribute on that, unfortunately. But that's about all I have.
I would concur. Thank you very much. I think the presentation was great, and I agree with. I'm a little confused on the Belmont piece of it, but I think more just in my brain. But I like the presentation. I think everything makes a lot of sense, and it was really easy to understand, which is important. So, especially as you're communicating it out to the community, benefits. So,
Raising my hand here to say, my take on the Belmont closure is it's kind of like half a roundabout, in that it solves a lot of the no roundabout problem. You get some of the benefits of roundabout, but you don't have the problem of all the impacts of the property there. So the way that if you walk through that and cycle through that and drive through that in your head several times from every which way you can do it, it really kind of makes sense. And one other comment I just heard about growy things. Well, I love to have planting and growy things. Having that as a divider adjacent immediately to a bike path means that there are times and months at a time where the growy stuff that usually stands up is dead and wet and flat and laying over the bike path, and it makes it unsafe. And so for that reason, I think that should be discouraged, maybe, unless it's something that can't do that, like a woody hedge but grass is a bad idea on the edge of a bike path because it falls in and when it's dead and stopping with snow, and then you crash. So that's that.
I'm excited about the placemaking for the alternative for closing Belmont. I think that would add a lot of community feel to the Heights, which has been lacking for years. So I think there's a lot of really cool things you can do. Even like a small farmers market or something like that would be really neat.
So just looking at this and not understanding the feasibility of it exactly, you have just the little section of the road as far as placemaking. However, wouldn't that entire lot to the south be placemaking as well? The
Yeah.
triangle piece?
Yeah, it could become if that parcel becomes acquired by the city to implement, and then that would also be part of that expanded placemaking opportunity.
I wonder if there would be a way to support businesses that are right there on the corner like yours to bring parking into that area that they would have to come in off of the alley behind Juanita's Market. Sorry, I'm using landmarks, Nathan, that you probably don't recognize. Maybe make parking in the area in front of Dave's business, but the access to it would be off the alley coming in off of A Street. And then, you know, I have no idea how the city goes about acquiring properties as well. So significantly, we're looking at 4 lots with these 2 proposals, and then definitely Dave's business is affected by that. Is there reparations that are paid to business owners in addition to buying properties, or how does the city do that? That might be a you question.
That would actually probably be the agency as the acquisition body. Since it's in the urban renewal area, the power to acquire property is probably focused through the agency as the body. At this point, the compensation to property owners is usually based upon real property acquisition exclusively. So I'm unaware of any other business compensation due to disruption that comes through urban renewal.
Most of these people probably have no idea where my location is or what I do or why it affects me.
Let's go ahead and is it okay if we take items from the audience at this point? This was kind of by design. I wanted to not have items from the audience at the beginning of the meeting because you would have had nothing to discuss until you heard the meeting. So go ahead. If you do want to share, please introduce yourself and where your business is or your property associated.
I'd love to. Can people see me or just hear me or?
Please, I'll turn the microphone on just for those in the audience. If you would speak to that, say who you are and address.
Hi, I'm Dave Stoffaker, and I live on 602 Ridgeview Court here in Hood River. And I'm a veterinarian, and I own Columbia Gorge Veterinary Clinic, which is on 1208 Belmont. So it's kind of faces that piece of property that you have as placemaking, shared street opportunity. That business has been there, I think, about 40 years. I've owned it for 20 years. We have probably in the range of 30 to 40 clients a day. And obviously a good number of them do drive. Yes, we have some that walk there. So for me, obviously, it's pretty concerning that it will have a somewhat significant impact, no matter how things work out on the business as it is there. I lease the space, and so I don't have any ability, for compensation from losing the land and its ability. I guess my points, as I heard you talk, I don't hear much mention about the Heights businesses at all. I heard traffic flow, pedestrian flow, but I did not really any mention throughout the discussion about businesses. And how might they be impacted or supported, and how changing the traffic flow and parking could affect them. And so I don't know if that is thought about a little or a lot, or if this is more about moving traffic through and moving people and not what the Heights business community might represent. I could argue a veterinarian in the community right there is an important piece of it. People like their local veterinarians. They don't like to actually have to go that far. As it is, if that's closed, I suspect it could be a challenge to my business, and moving is appealing, but the options in this town have become, you just don't pick a spot with 2,000 square feet to just move your business to very easily these days. So, you know, I mean, at the point in my career, I could see if 5 years down the line, I would probably just be more apt to close up than try to move. So I would just hope that maybe people think about that the little bit of parking that's there and those businesses don't have access in any other way. I mean, if that placemaker was actually a street, that there was local access, but it didn't go through. And even if that was closed on the weekends and you could be used for a farmer's market, but if you still have cars to go in from 12th Street and park at my business in that, or in that parking lot. Otherwise, the parking lot to the immediate west, that's where all of the people who have businesses, and there's 3 different businesses on that block there. That's where they all park. There's about, I don't know, 15 spots there. And so that lot is owned by the same people, the Paddocks. But so I don't know, that's a thought I had, is if you still allowed access into there, even though it wasn't a through street, you might support those businesses. Again, maybe not lose the placemaking appeal. It doesn't have to be one or the other, I don't think. So that would be a thought that I have. But so I think those are the most important points for me. I'm emotional about it. It is obviously my life and my career, and I own that business. I want to see positive movement in community, but it's a big gulp to see what could be something that puts my practice at jeopardy. So. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the audience who'd like to share?
I signed up.
Well, thank you, Megan. Go ahead and step up, introduce yourself.
So I would encourage the city to follow the same practices for all your meetings. I signed up. I'm the only one signed up on that form right now. So can you please honor the order that people sign up?
I didn't.
Thank you.
Nobody signed up prior to noon today, I believe. Did you sign up when you came in this evening?
I just signed up when I came in.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So Dustin, for clarification, is it noon the day of our meeting?
That's virtual.
For virtual, or is that for here as well? Yeah, I think we let it. Okay, perfect.
So my name is Megan Ramey. I live at 1886 Belmont. And is for myself. This is Earth Week. And I am here commenting on a plan that may or may not affect our carbon emissions. All right, deep breath. Okay. So I am the Safe Routes to School manager for the county, for the whole district. And this is my comment letter as my Safe Routes to School manager position. The school district will be submitting their own comment letter for the Urban Renewal Agency on Monday. First, I want to respond to my vet. I really appreciate your comments. I biked my cat Maddie to take her final breaths with you. And I take my cat's bike to you to visit, and I really appreciate you being 2 blocks away from my house. It means like in a time of crisis, it means a huge deal to me. I agree with you on your recommendation for I don't see the idea of it being a playing area in the middle of a traffic sewer. Nobody wants to be outside next to cars that are going around it constantly. What you just recommended was perfect. Make it for your parking, and on the weekend, maybe it's a farmer's market. Okay, that is like not my Safe Routes to School manager cap. Okay. Safe Routes to School manager cap. I would encourage the Urban Renewal Advisory Committee and the Urban Renewal Agency to remind you guys of what your goals are for the streetscape project. Number 1, calm traffic. Number 2, livability and business. Number 3, identity. 4, safety and public space. 5, development, and 6, engagement. Parking supply and vehicle level of service were referenced in the memo more than these goals. Regarding the Safe Routes to School plan, I pulled parent concerns and infrastructure recommendations in the reference to the memo, and you'll see that if you go to page 1, 2, 3, 4, you'll see like a heat map of the parent concerns. So the highest density of parent comments in the Heights are A at Wilson and 12th and 13th. Number 2 is Taylor and Pine in 12th and 13th, and number 3 is May and 13th. And then in terms of routes, the highest density of comments is on 12th Street, particularly from Union and Pacific, which is between Dutch Brothers and the weird truck, food truck mall we have. Okay. So back to the first page. I just have to point this out, and this is another reason for my saltiness, is that I saw the mention of the accommodation for Sprinter vehicles twice in this memo. And how much do those cost? Are they like $160,000? And I didn't see one mention of the low income housing students that can't walk or bike to school because their parents don't feel safe for them to walk or bike to school. So we have an equity issue that was glaring in this memo. Okay. Support. May and 13th roundabout. Awesome. Whatever. That's perfect. Number 2, Belmont 13th, 12th, 13th intersection. Great, except for my vet's issue with the placemaking. My concern, and this is in direct reference to the Safe Routes to School plan. The east-west routes, I hate to even comment on this. Contraflow lanes are a standard in design. And if you watch people when they bike, they will tell you where they want to bike. When they are biking against traffic, we call them salmon. It means that you need to accommodate their behavior, not try and shun them away from doing something. Kids cannot be educated on how to bike places. You need to watch them and see, oh, they're biking on the sidewalk, so we need to make them a protected bike lane. So contraflow lanes are the solution for one-way streets. Okay, A and Taylor. My only moment of pause on those 2 streets. I agree with the one-way design on all of them. A and Taylor, you have a contraflow lane behind vehicles who are diagonal parked, Sprinter vans who are reversing and probably can't see kids who are this tall. So that contraflow lane needs to be against the curb. As or the other way of traffic needs to be against the curb for the people biking. This is all under the lens of me being a safe routes to school manager. Next. 12th Street. When I hear, and first of all, I have to commend Nathan on his language. He says a lot. When he says, people who bike, people who walk, people who drive. That is one of the best ways you can use when you use language, instead of saying cyclist, driver, pedestrian, that pits people against one another. So I commend Nathan on his language. 12th Street, narrowing the lane, the cycle track lane from 10 feet to 8 feet. It's going to be a high point of friction, and I'll tell you why. As a mom who has biked with her daughter when she was 3 years old on a balance bike, and she was biking next to me, I would have to put, we call it the mom assist. I put my hand on the back of her, on her back, and help her through intersections. With 8 feet, you're not going to allow for parent and child side-by-side biking. It needs to be 12 feet. I included on the very back the ODOT urban design or the blueprint for urban design manual. On the very back, it says for a two-way clear travel area in an urban area where biking is prioritized, which I think we've already established that biking is going to be a priority, you need 12 feet for a cycle track. Okay. 13th Street. I don't understand why we are sacrificing parking for a turn lane, for a center turn lane. If parking is really valuable to the businesses in this community, why are we putting in a turn lane like we have on Cascade Avenue that causes people, when you have a center turn lane and they're turning into the businesses they want to go into, they're having to like triple check whether there's somebody walking or biking there before they turn into that business. So why not use that turn lane for no parallel parking? All right, 12th Street. Back to 12th Street, sorry. 12th Street from Pacific to Union. This is probably my biggest point of contention. Go back to my first page and look at the picture on the first page. That is a picture I took yesterday morning when I was leading the bike train to school. And this is like what happens every single day on this section of sidewalk. This is what the shared use path concept is. You see the person who is running with their dog having to step off into oncoming traffic to let kids bike to school safely. If that is not like a perfect glaring example of the priorities of our city, I don't know what is. And this just happened yesterday, and it happens all the time. There was a gentleman who was probably, I don't know, maybe 275 pounds who was walking every single day along the sidewalk. Amazing, commendable behavior. The bike train would have to go by. He would pull off to the side to let the bike train go by. One of those times he pulled off to the side, he lost his footing and fell to the ground, and the ambulance had to be called. So I am taking big contention with the shared use path on 12th Street between Union and Pacific, because it does not let people know where they should be. So mix e-bikes going, I don't know, 20 to 25 miles per hour with people walking their dogs, with kids riding bikes, with seniors walking, maybe with mobility devices, and you have a high point of friction. So why not just continue the two-way cycle track down to Pacific Street and take the center turn lane again? I don't understand why a center turn lane is needed to go into the Shell gas station when they're not supposed to be turning into the Shell gas station. All right. Again, I apologize for my saltiness. I have the privilege of teaching these kids how to bike and walk every single day. I've been at Parkdale this week. I was at Cascade Locks last week. I've taught, I think, 12 kids how to bike, and I'm talking kindergarten through 5th grade on how to bike. And it breaks my heart when their parents ask me where they're supposed to bike from their house. Because these aren't the kids that their parents have time to put their bikes on the back of cars and take them places. These are the kids that need access to bike from their house. And so that's what I want to leave you with. I apologize again for my saltiness. I wouldn't be a safe routes to school manager for the school district if I wasn't passionate about this. Okay, thank you guys.
Quick question for you, Nick. Do you like the traffic one ways, the direction that they're currently going? Does that go into safe streets for you?
Yeah.
Contra lanes, and maybe I'm overthinking this with the Pine Street. That doesn't affect you at all with children? Okay.
No.
You would know.
And I just want to say thank you to Dave and Megan for speaking, and like, I definitely know this can be emotionally triggering, and it affects us, you know, all in different ways, and it is a lot to get up and share that. So, but I think it's super important for all of us to, you know, share that. So I just appreciate you coming.
I appreciate what you suggested, Dave, and Megan reiterated it. I didn't think about that, but keeping Belmont open with a driveway off of 12th Street into there, and then having a decorative barrier where the stoplight's going to be, to where there's no potential entrance or exit there. That would keep your business open there, would keep the business across the street. I do like the idea of calming, and I do like the idea of placemaking, but I think you said something very, I don't know how that little triangle right there with traffic whizzing by both directions is that place. I love the roundabout down on May Street, because I think that gives us an entrance to the heights. We have Jackson Park and we have the roundabout. It'd be, you know, pie in the sky if we had all the space in the world. I'd love to have a double roundabout on Union and Belmont, but that still doesn't make a place maker or a place for a Saturday market or things like that. I don't know, Nathan, what are your ideas, just knee-jerk, about potentially keeping that road open from the east side, but closing it from the west side?
Yeah, that is consistent with the way that we've envisioned it. I'm going to share my screen again, and it's something that I guess I went through fairly quickly and didn't comment on. Yeah. Are you seeing my screen again? So
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, yeah. So there was the thought. So my cursor is here at 12th and Belmont, kind of Union, and this gray area is a driveway curb cut, with the idea that recognizing that Dave, your business or kind of property here does have the 4 or 5 head-in parking stalls right off Belmont today, and that there's that parking lot there, that this could continue to provide access to local businesses and alley access from a maintenance, delivery, and kind of aspect. And so, you know, what this placemaking shared street opportunity becomes is just sort of a, you know, it's space, but I think continuing to accommodate access is important, and it's something that we have been thinking about.
Yeah, and the bicycle access too, Nathan, is part of that. Wanting to be able to make sure people can get from the bike lanes on Belmont over to 12th Street.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, are there any other items items that you guys here tonight or on Zoom would like to discuss or ask Nathan or Dustin? Members of your.
Well, I was just gonna maybe say something about the issues, some issues that they raised, which is the bike lane width. I do agree, like, I don't understand, I don't have access to the slides that we can share with them. There's like going from 10 to 8, but then we have 3 feet of something that doesn't even like a planter or something. I don't know. But like, I understand having a barrier, but I don't, some of it seemed like overkill. I like this.
I think what we're looking at is unlike just a paint delineation, this is more of a physically separated buffer of the track
Okay.
away from traffic.
But if you need like a rail, why do we have 3 feet of space for maybe even 1 foot thick rail? or
Yes,
something?
I think it's just a physically separated, although the rail is 1 foot, there's still some footing, and even though it's 1 foot, we don't want anyone really to encourage right up to it.
Sure.
So,
But also like extending the parking for these extra extremely large vehicles, like. I know nobody pays attention to the signs, but that we have now that say don't park your big giant vans here, but I still think that. Giving access to bikers is more important than letting a sprinter van or very large truck parking space on a certain road. Like I'm sure there's a parking space they would fit in a block away if they need to park in that area. You know, I don't know. I don't necessarily like the extending the parking and taking away from the bike.
May I ask you a question for clarification on the 12 foot? That's you're thinking from 12th Street to that road?
On 12th Street from May to Pacific.
Kind of 12 foot wide double lane?
Yes.
Okay. So everything that we have drawn right now is either 10 foot or 8 foot.
And I'm just using the ODOT urban blueprint for urban.
So the one-way clear travel on the 10 foot, that doesn't account for the angle parking. Is that your concern there? From Union to May Street?
Union to May Street, my concern is limiting the width of the two-way cycle track to 8 feet when that does not accommodate side-by-side driving for parents and children and or I don't know if you've seen all the kids on e-bikes, but if they're 16, hopefully, when they're 16 and biking they want to bike next to each other. And so when you have 2 people biking next to each other, coming against another more people biking next to each other, you don't like the worst thing ever is for their handlebars to touch because that is a crash. So.
Well, and I'm noticing that like even if bike lanes or biking is low priority, like it's still a 10-foot recommendation.
Right.
So I don't see why we would go anything less than.
No, I agree. I like the on page 23, Nathan, of your presentation. I like the 16-foot angle parking versus the 17 foot. I like the 10 foot on 12 from Union to May Street. However, I think from Union back to Pacific, I would prefer to have 12 foot there because then we have two-way traffic. And I also don't think it's feasible or practical to put the kids down on Indian Creek Trail there. And while that might only be 30 feet ascent or descent, that's just too much. I think we need to keep the traffic up on 12th Street there.
I'm just asking for consistency in design.
Right.
Like when you go from a shared use path. Or vice versa, from a shared use path to separation between people walking and biking. They won't know what to do with each other, and so I don't want, as somebody who walks a lot in this town, I don't want to be buzzed by a kid on an e-bike. And that's what a shared use path will be.
So I think, Dustin, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think one of the things that Nathan is looking for is direction from the advisory council.
Just your comments that will take to the agency.
That you're gonna take those, you don't need any, okay. Are we in agreement with the roundabout at Main Street as something that collectively we all like? I don't know if we can spot, I mean, we're not making a motion to vote, but
Yes, and my concern was that we have activated beakers on all the crosswalks. All the crosswalks that
the roundabout specifically, not crosswalks everywhere.
no, at the roundabout at Main 13.
Sorry, I agree that I don't think that the signaling at that intersection will be anything but a problem. The roundabout is the best way to go. I also wanted to mention the bike lanes on the one-way streets, that I do absolutely think that they should be next to the sidewalk. They're just safer.
But
Thanks. It just occurred to me that Pacific to Union connector, it took me a minute to find the slide. I don't see a page number 26. Or no, page 21 of 23. There's a cross section of that street with a couple pedestrians on it. Nathan, would it be possible to, rather than keep that elevated shared use lane above the traffic lane, instead of doing that, build an extended curb and drop the shared use path and make it wider instead of building it way out over the hillside? Does that make sense? I don't know if I explained that well.
I'm not
But
following.
So I think I have the right page.
Have it at street
There's
grade?
several cross sections of that. Figure 18, there's one, there's a note. So you've got that long grade down towards the lower path
Mhm.
that goes by the creek. Instead of leaving the pedestrian / cycle path up at grade level where the cars are, what if that were cut down into the slope, thereby gaining more width, and then have a big curb to keep the cars out of there? I don't know what that would do for snow removal and all the other things, but it would be more of a division away from the traffic and also potentially buy a bunch of width of that travel lane. It's just a question. I don't know if that's feasible.
So is that separating, instead of having a shared use path, sort of one level for sidewalk and a separate level that's set further away from the roadway for people biking?
Yeah, not necessarily further away, but closer to sea level. So on the top of those, on figure 18, the top drawing has that big retaining wall, but maybe the retaining wall could be scooted all the way over against the roadway, and the lower level of the retaining wall would be the level of the shared path. Does that you follow that? I don't know. It's just a thought.
Yes, I follow what you're saying. And
I don't know if that's
basically
feasible. It's just a thought.
what you'd be adding is a vehicular guardrail or barrier so that a vehicle doesn't drop down.
Yep, exactly.
And
exactly.
Sort of.
And currently the snow removal means they take it off the vehicle, the car pathway, and put it on the shared use lane, so you can't walk on it at all or ride on it at all in the winter. And so it would make that worse probably, but that's currently the snow removal technique that DOT uses.
So I think the thing, Justin, I think you're looking to take to the agency board is I think, well, we don't really have a choice. We're all in agreement with the spotlight on Belmont. And the choice we don't have is the other roundabout. So that's not feasible. I think if you read it, there's up to $9 million, and that exceeds our maximum indebtedness by a little bit. And I I like the suggestion that was brought up tonight, having access into your business and also the other business on that corner from 12th Street. You know, you wouldn't have access off of 13. I like the idea of making that stoplight a three-way intersection and people can circle around the block and get park. I mean, potentially, you might be able to increase parking in that little area there as well, so you might not necessarily get a net loss of parking. But I'm curious as to what your thoughts are, like, to be honest.
That whole scenario actually came to my mind when I was looking at it initially before we discussed anything, so I'm glad that clearly that, and especially I'm encouraged that both of you felt the same way about it. And having heard that, I definitely think that that is something we should recommend be considered.
Yeah, I agree, and I appreciate the comments and the enlightenment, and I think Nathan's slide did show shared access or something, I forget, but it wasn't completely closing up the street, and we dismissed that. So, yeah, I support that.
Did we lose Clint?
Sorry, my battery died. Can you repeat that, Jack? Or were you just asking if I had a comment?
No, Clint, we're just talking about the traffic light on Belmont and having
I
access
heard.
to the businesses there. I know that you spoke highly of what Bend has as a placemaker and a space, but I like what Megan said. I don't really see that as being that space up in the heights. But what are your thoughts on the traffic signal and access from 12th Street to those businesses?
I appreciate Dave's comment about the disruption. It's going to be big and it's going to be for years, as it is for Amanda and me and Jack, everybody up there with a business. But that's the nature of growing, right? And the placemaker for me is not like a park. I don't think I misspoke about that maybe, but it's more. Here the islands are tiny, like you'd never go out there and sit or anything, but there's sculpture and there's plantings and it's attractive and it's a differentiation of a part of town that you're in here. I don't know how many roundabouts are in Bend. There must be 50 or 60 now, but you can identify them by what's in the middle. And so you know where you are even without looking for the street signs, which are admittedly harder to find on a roundabout than on a true 90/90 street. But it's the traffic flow and the attitude that traffic here is so much different than it was 20 years ago when I lived here. It's to not put too fine a point on it. People are nicer drivers, and which is a weird thing to say about Bend because you sure wouldn't think that. You know, that's not been my overwhelming thought about people from Bend forever, and it just feels that way. And now I ride my bike and I walk through town and I drive through town and I do it every day, and I'm here going to the hospital every day right now, and so I go through, I don't know, 50 roundabouts or 20 roundabouts each direction, and it's peaceful. It's an easy way to get through town, and I wish for that for Hood River, to have a calming and a peaceful way to get from one end of town to the other and from down to low and vice versa, rather than these weird hurry up and rush and panic accelerations across 13th at Belmont and the near misses at May and 13th. It's terrifying. So I appreciate the work that you guys have done. I really do. And it's clear to read. There's lots of details, of course, to work out, but I think the two big bookends are really, really in the right direction, and supported. And yes, we can tidy up the buttons, but the overall aspect, I really appreciate it. And I support it a lot.
Travis, your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for a layman here, it's really great to understand the difference between the roundabout and so where it's applicable and the lighted intersection. So I fully support that. I also support the one-way access up at Belmont. I think there's probably some more. I just need to get my brain around some of the other comments that came up around widening up by Pacific, widening the shared use the shared path. I'm a mountain biker, so I don't cycle on the streets a lot. So it's really great to get, but I have young kids. So it's really great to hear a perspective around that. And so there's definitely some fine tuning to do, but some of the major points of the plan I fully support and I'm excited for. So it's, like I said, as far as some of the other things, as far as putting the contraflow path next to the sidewalk and sort of understanding how people back up and potentially get hit the children, or like how you need a mother or a parent and a child that are riding bikes. I think there probably needs to be a little more thought put to that. But all in all, I think I'm really pleased with it.
Then I think the only other section in this zone is going to be on page 27, figure 18. I like the shared path up on 12 from Union to Pacific. And shown in the drawing, it has some landscaping buffers and things, but it shows a landscaping buffer of 5 feet, shared path of 12 feet, and then it shows an additional 3 feet that I believe is like retaining wall and landscaping. So that's 20 feet. I think it's just a matter of Nathan, you drawing that up in a way that creates a safe environment for those that ride, those that walk, those that drive.
Mr. Chairman, I echo your comments, and also I'd like to ask Nathan and Dustin to explore widening the dual bike path all the way to May Street. I'm not sure what it would take.
Yeah, that's one point that I wanted to see if there was some consensus on regarding the diagonal parking on 12. It's changed from 16 to 17 and a half versus, and the trade-offs of an 8-foot path. Are you all generally, is it your consensus to, we are going to shift or borrow against that? Would you recommend it going back to the path versus a longer parking space?
Yes.
I think so, yes. All right. And I know the Sprinter was mentioned, but just for the sake of comparison, a Subaru Forester is just short of 16 feet. So I know I'm not trying to sway you away from that, but I want to make sure that we're not just talking about the 20 feet of Sprinter van or 15 or 19 feet of F-150 pickup, that it is going to be tight, whether 16 or 17, and backing out towards the bike path. So it's if there's borrow and need, I clearly have an indication from you all that your preference is the bike path. So I want to make sure that we're not talking about accommodating the largest vehicles as the design standard. We're on a real estate diet. The sidewalks are narrow, the bike path is narrow, the lanes are narrow, the parking back out is going to be tough. So I want to make sure that we're not, our borrowing preference isn't, we're over capacity, the back out of the parking space. It's going to be tight. It's going to be narrower than your narrowest parking lot in the city for grocery, and it's going to feel that way, and it's going to translate to calming. It's going to feel like tension in all ways. All those modes are going to feel tight because we're not starting from scratch here. We don't have the benefit of bends with, and in Greenfield we're trying to retrofit, and so everything in this, every foot matters in all these designs, and trying to accommodate a lot of modes in real estate that came about 100 years ago. So as long as I have consensus, that helps me provide direction to the agency.
Dustin, how many parking spaces would lose if we went parallel instead of diagonal on 12?
Nathan, you have that number, I hope. We talked about this before.
It's a small number. It's like 6 stalls. So I think, let me.
No, Nathan, if we went from parallel or if we went from angled on 12th to
parallel. Yeah, there's not a huge gain in switching to angle given the short blocks, intersections and driveways.
No, on 12, not on the short blocks.
Yeah, no.
Okay. So.
Yeah, I think we were looking at, there are 41 stalls today on the west side of Wealth. 30, if 35, and we'd be increasing to 41 with angle parking. So it's not a huge number.
So that's an option too, you know, we consider a 16-foot to 17-foot angled space, a parallel space is approximately
8 feet. So you're looking at 8 feet difference. So you could put 2 feet into the cycle track, and you could put 2 feet into each of the sidewalks, and that's 6. You've got 2 extra feet to. I don't, you know.
Again, this is trade-off in parking to real estate. So would you trade 8 spaces for 2 to 3 feet back to the cycle, 2 to 3 feet back for both sidewalks? And that's.
But we've talked about the angle parking, calling traffic as well.
Well, I think all of it's going to call traffic. So I mean, so it's just that's up to you all. Or it's not up to you all, it's all up to the agency, but for your consideration.
Yeah, I'm gonna reiterate what I said about as big a proponent as I am of back end angled parking for cars. I think if we make a really excellent cycle path and more people cycle, we don't need as much parking for cars on an hour by hour basis in the heights.
But the parking wasn't critical, if I understood that right. Parking wasn't necessarily critical anyway, right? I mean,
Correct.
we have plenty of capacity.
Yeah. But as useful as it is also to like change the view lane for vehicular traffic that you know, without guidance, it wants to go faster rather than slower. And if guided well, it goes slower. Like a roundabout slows it all down, and a limited line of sight slows it down. So if you have to navigate from left to right to get around angled parking that sticks out on the left and then sticks out on the right, you don't have this long line of sight to speed toward, and so that slows traffic down and makes cross pedestrian and cross cycle and cross car traffic easier to navigate. So but if it's kind of moot and all we lose is square footage for pedestrian and cycle track, then I'm more in favor of that.
Yeah, I just want to put my 2 cents in about prioritizing bike traffic and walking traffic over cars, because in general, we're going to be hopefully moving away from so much car traffic in general as a society. So yeah, my votes for.
I would support adding more cycling paths and maybe losing a few stalls. Especially if we still get the same calming effect, like Clint's saying. I didn't really think about how the parallel parking versus the angled parking calms. But
So I guess now in order of magnitude, you support, if there was the angled parking, you would support narrowing it to give it to the bike path. And beyond that, you would be supportive of, if we went from angled to a parallel condition, you would support that over narrowing it so that we give more real estate back to the cycle track and maybe public domain against walking domain and store frontage.
I'm gonna take heed to Amanda and Clint. You guys have businesses down there, so. Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah, I mean, I think that seemed like a general consensus without a vote. So that's helpful in terms of guidance and what we did.
All right. Anything else from the members that are outside of our presentation?
well, I guess the other thing I was going to add back to calming traffic, there's the bump stops and there's other ways to calm it as well, right? We have other tools at our disposal, because I do think it should be. I mean, calming traffic needs to be a priority up in the heights. It's kind of obnoxious.
Yeah, we'll definitely be incorporating the bump outs. They serve pedestrians well. They actually also serve vehicle traffic well, because we'll make a little more gracious radiuses that allow them to turn, and also improve visibility, so they're not. It gives them an opportunity, a vehicle driver on a short block, to not opportunity to do as much guessing. So I think that's definitely a technique that we expect to be employed up and down the corridor altogether. So.
Great. Makes sense.
This has been very helpful.
Well, Nathan, thank you for your presentation tonight, and if there's nothing else. And adjourn our meeting, thank you, and thank you.
I'd like to I want to throw one more thank you into Dustin. I don't see him on my screen here, but Dustin, thank you so much. I reached out to him and got some extra special credit help prior to this with some questions that I had, and there you are. Hey, so I just want to recognize you. Thank you so much for taking the time to walk me through some stuff. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you all for spending your time and your nights doing this. It's super important to the community, and you've been great. Thank you. Thanks for spending time.
Bye all.